Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Hunt Science Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Lance, a professionally certified wildlife biologist and natural resource professional, college professor, and owner of Land Source Consulting. The Hunt Science Podcast is dedicated to bring you the latest information on popular habitat management topics, wildlife science, hunting strategies, and the general conservation and land management practices to help preserve our natural resources. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to have you with us and hope that you enjoy today's episode. With that said, let's get started. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by our primary sponsor, Land Source Consulting. Land Source Consulting is an Ohio-based wildlife and land management consulting company that I own and operate not only here in Ohio, but through the Midwest and beyond. At Land Source, we work with private landowners just like you to build and develop those property-specific management programs to help bring the goals that you have on your property to life. If you're interested in getting more information on who we are and how we can help you, please visit us over at landsourceconsulting.com. There you can check out the different service packages and capabilities that we can provide. We would love to hear from you, so don't hesitate to reach out to us and schedule that free consultation either through our website, or you can reach out to us and connect with us on our other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. That's landsourceconsulting.com, building relationships for a more sustainable future. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Eric Lance, welcoming those who are new to the show, and of course, thanking those who are returning to us once more. On today's episode, I've got Jason Snavely of Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting and Seed Company. Jason is a friend and fellow biologist of mine located in Pennsylvania. And, it just goes without saying, I'm really excited to have him on today's show because I've been following him for some time. This is our second time actually sitting down to record an episode, as we had some technical issues the first time with connection issues. And actually on this attempt in recording the episode, it went well, except for the last 5 or 10 minutes of the show that did not record, probably because of some connection issues that either one of us were having. Either way, we've got an hour-long episode for you guys that has just a wealth of information and important topics in there that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. Jason, like most, I am sure will be a recurring guest of the show, and I'm just excited to have him on this episode, and I'm super excited to get it started. With that being said, let's get going with the show and welcome everybody once again to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast with Jason Snavely. All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. Once again, I'm here with a good friend of mine, Jason Snavely. Jason from Drop-Tine Wildlife Consulting and Seed Company. Jason was with us on an episode before. We had some technical difficulties, and it's taken us about 2 months to reconnect. So here we are once again. Jason, how you doing, man?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
Good. So, last time we were on the show, we were talking about, fertilizers, is kind of where we were going. And we were leading into, how does someone get started, with this whole, no-till, kind of lifestyle on their property, managing their farm, managing their property, whatever it is. And especially here in June 2022 with fertilizer shortages and food shortages and all those things projected, I think this is a good segue to kind of give our listeners. And plus, too, you're a consultant just like I am. So we deal with private landowners. We deal with people, at the individual level, on the individual property. And, we see these things and we get these questions a lot. So, let's expand that, and talk to people like what's our approach to say, okay, it's time to make the shift. What are the considerations and, how important is it? Because you're into this, way more than I am, as far as in practice at a scale level. So, what do you think?
Well, there's, as always, Eric, you leave a lot to unpack there. To me, it's all about making the system more resilient and becoming independent of things like what you're talking about with supply and demand issues and, what the market bears. And of course, what bureaucrats, want to manage or control on their end. Today, if you see me knocking things off, I'm big on context, and I'm really big on observation, being present. So I'm in the middle of I think it's a roughly 6-acre field of mine that needs to be planted green and crimp terminated probably this week. But I wanted to be in the field to give everybody kind of that feel. I know you can't hear or probably even see a fraction of what I hear and see as far as bird species and insects.
I hear a couple birds.
This
Yeah.
is life. This is what it's all about right here. So many years ago, I guess going on a decade now, when I realized that, from the agricultural, if you will, the food plots, agricultural standpoint, the forages in our management programs, which, contrary to what some of the academicians wanted us to believe in college, food plots and forages and planting supplemental, plants in the way of food plots or whatever you want to call it, has been instrumental in us managing white-tailed deer and other wildlife game non-game species. So it's been a huge part of my business. And when we said, or when I rolled out into my field that year and realized that something was just not right, it just there was, as a biologist, I'm trained to look for life like you, and what within that ecosystem doesn't seem to be functioning as a whole or as a part of the whole, and it just seemed like something was off, right? So I can remember the first time one of my clients in western Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, canceled a $6,000 or $8,000 fertilizer order with my guy, the guy who I had used as a fertilizer salesman. It was like the end of the world to him. And I remember being at the hardware store. This is how how much of a memory it is for me. And he called me and called me and called me, and I thought, boy, what's going on? I answered the phone, and he said, "What are you doing? All of this work we've done for the last 15 years is going to be destroyed. You're going to work backwards. The deer populations are going to implode, and you just won't have any more wildlife if you stop fertilizing like some of your clients are telling me that you're doing." And I don't want to say it instilled some doubt in what we were doing, but I look back now and I just shake my head at how much we didn't, and so many of us still don't understand how this system works and how efficient and self-operating this system can be. So I look back now and I'm thankful that we started this ahead of the curve, back before any shortages or perceived shortages, or they call it quantitative easing. I call it printing fake fiat money, or I should say currency, which obviously erodes our purchasing power, right? So
Yeah.
fertilizer is actually free. I tell my clients that we drill our fertilizer, right, in the way of plants. All these plants here around me, I don't know what you can see, but there's 4010 spring peas, there's hairy vetch, there's cereal rye.
Yeah. I see the vetch and the rye.
There's all kind of other stuff down here growing from years past. That is our fertilizer, and that relationship that those plants build with the microbial component in the soil is where we get our fertility from.
Yeah. It's I try to always look and give analogies to people, and especially when it comes to this, I think there's a lot of reasons, but the other thing why people don't shift to, I mean, like you said, we're biologists, man. In looking at, you said it good. It's so simple. It's like we're trained to find life. And I look behind you and, I see, vegetation, but I also can imagine how many bugs are flying around, how many different bird species are feeding on those insects, and then just the cascading of fauna that are going to be utilizing those areas. I mean, it's just, when you go out to an area like that, it's you can't help but look at that and go, yeah, man, there's a lot of life, out here from the biological level. I mean, we always talk about the different ologies when it comes to biology, all the different subsets. I mean, name it, you can study it in areas like that. I mean, there's everything there. And to me, that's always kind of been something to where people can go, yeah, I see that. Well, why below the surface, why are you not thinking the same way? Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't, I'm like you, even back then, when I was in school, I learned the same thing. Dump, NPK, 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 and what it is. And you don't know any better going through school, like you said. I mean, you're pushed this agenda, or not really agenda, but you're pushed, the culture, from academics and things like that, and you just don't know any better, So you sit there, but when you step back and go, yeah, there's biology in the soil. Why am I not treating it the same way? And why are people, like, how many times can we show you like 2 + 2 is 4, but you're still kind of arguing that it's 5, type of thing. And it's definitely a culture shift. But the other thing too is it's hard. It's a hard thing for someone who's been doing something for 20 years to say, yeah, let's make a change. I think of the farmers around my property to, what it would take, as many thousands of acres as they have across the county, is, to sit there and to have them make a shift. I mean, financially would be horrifying for someone that does that for a living. So I can completely understand it, but so what's your approach, when someone comes to you and says, Jason, I mean, my whole livelihood is in this, production agriculture, that I've got on my property, where do I start? Because I think there's probably a lot of people that want to do this, and, I start small, I tell them, what's your kind of approach with people?
Yeah. And I'm very fortunate in that I think so, in that I'm able to be injected into that production agriculture, even though I'm not a farmer or a producer in way of, sending grain or cattle or whatever down the line. I've been injected into that aspect as well because of some of the people who I've developed friendships with, and I'm learning from, and it's a two-way street. So they're also learning about the benefits of wildlife ecology in their system as well, and making it much more productive. So I think the first point is to make a distinction between that sort of production agriculture and what we're doing, right? So I'm first and foremost, I'm a wildlife biologist, ecologist, and consultant. So, you have to, again, that context, right? How does this fit into our world? When it comes to production agriculture, I will just say a little bit about that. Dr. Rick Haney and I have a new infield soil health tool, which has put me in the carbon market game.
Oh, we were going to get to that.
And I was going to bring one with me here this morning, but I can only carry so much in this rickety old rocking chair out here, which is bound to break on me any moment. But, that world, there are some folks making good money once again as farmers, as producers. And I think, I tell young people when I see them now, as the older generations leave the farm and, go off farm to work and sell off the farms, or the banks take the farms back, there has never been, in my opinion, a better time to get back into production agriculture. But you've got to use this. You can't follow the system that got us here, right? So enough with that. I guess going back to the ecological side of things. When I started this, I met guys like Ray Archuleta and Gabe Brown, everybody that we see on and hear about. Got very, very fortunate the day I met Dr. Rick Haney, who really helped me understand how the system
those guys
actually works.
Yeah, they're the pioneers of it, really, right now. I mean, the ones
the modern day.
Yeah,
they're the modern day. They were the guys who said, no, you know what? We are over fertilizing, and we can be profitable, and it's not about yield, and it's not about, growing a genetically superior soybean or corn plant in the lab. It's more about minimizing or eliminating unnecessary inputs, which are destructive to the system anyway, in most regards. So yeah, I think I guess the take home points there are, it's important to understand that there's a distinction between production agriculture and what we're doing. What we are doing after being involved in the production agricultural side of things is so much easier. It's so much easier. It's so much more rewarding, in my opinion. Not that providing healthy food to the human population isn't rewarding. That's probably, that should be our end goal. But we see immediate, like right now around me, the life around me, we see immediate benefits and return on investment, which is what we as humans really want. We want instant gratification.
Yeah, and as a biologist too, so I mean, I'm pretty surrounded by agriculture and things too. And when I talk with landowners, is it's the same approach is, the whole nature's image thing. So when we've got agriculture, livestock, fields and things like that, it's trying to incorporate things like the agroforestry type practices and saying, hey, you've got cattle out here. I'm not saying you can't have cattle or shouldn't have cattle. You can have cattle, but let's do some management that's going to have vast impacts not only for them but also for the wildlife around. You can do the things in conjunction. You can't. It's not you can only have one without the other. You absolutely can do things. And a lot of times, just using the agroforestry type of thing is, it's you can go out there and do timber harvest practices, and you can provide these heat reduction spaces for cattle that are out in the hot day, and you've got a nice canopy, a small canopy area over there that they can go get out of the sun and cool down. And especially if there's a little stream or something going through there, I mean, there are things on your property a lot of times that you can get done fairly easily. And then you talked about the fertilizer being available. Yeah, like I'm over here looking at your website and different blends and stuff like that. But it's like, there's a reason why people plant cover crops, for nitrogen fixation, because that's free. Well, the seed's not free, but you're getting the free fertilizer aspect. The plants are fixing the soil, right? And then you start letting things go over time with root exudates starting to break down rocks and minerals and things like. I mean, all these things are available. And then you mentioned crimp terminating. I mean, putting the organic material back, or organic matter back into the soil. I mean, all these things, you can do. It's not. It's. I don't want to say it's not hard. It's not easy. It's time consuming, but it's not something that's going to be like that overnight, where you're going to see, this big massive change to what you're looking at or what we're looking at. In your background, and all these things. And that's what people want. And this, I mean, today people want to take that pill so it just happens real quick. It's like, no, man,
Yeah.
it's going to take time. You want to change, personally, like, like I'm up every day at 5 to go to the gym. I go to the gym. I teach my jiu-jitsu classes in the morning for 6 a.m. classes. And then I go to work. Then I teach evening class. It's like, you eat right. It's like, hey, it takes work, man. Anything you're going to do is going to take work, and this is no different. But this is obviously something that should be a passion of yours, why you're going down that road. This should be, I should love to go out there and plant a cover crop. I should love to go out there and crimp terminate. I should love to go out there and survey some timber. Like, all these things should be just completely something you want to do.
Yeah, and it there's it really depends also where you're at. I'm sitting here in Pennsylvania on my farm. We don't realize how easy we have it. And folks in, I'd say northern Tennessee, maybe even north of Tennessee, it's a heck of a lot easier. I have clients in Texas, Central Texas, South Texas, totally different ball game. Again, context. The clients in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. If this takes 5 years for us to get some traction, north of the Mason-Dixon line, it's probably 7 to 10 for them. And I'll be honest with you, initially, I didn't tell clients that the system, it takes much, much longer to make it resilient and self-replicating and get back to the way it should function in that part of the country than in other parts of the country. And initially, I didn't want them to quit, right? Because I believed in it and I had seen it work on properties where production agriculture was incorporated into their program. But now, I'll be honest with you, one of the main reasons I went this route is because I've always been a fan of following my gut, and it all just made perfect sense from the first time I went to Kansas to talk to some of these guys. But it's sort of to me, maybe I shouldn't say this, but sort of the attraction and the appeal is because very few people, think it's a great, sexy idea, and then even fewer people latch onto it and stick with it without quitting. And to me, that's where I want to be. I've never been a fan of the herding mentality. So this is really fun for me. Now I don't really follow YouTube. To me, this is where the game is played.
Yeah.
There's the finches over here are just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
To me, this is, I like to observe nature and learn. This is where I learn. I don't learn from academics anymore. I don't learn in books, and I love
Yeah.
reading the literature just like everybody else. But this is, this is where the game is played. And if you're not outside absorbing this and learning from this and looking at the responses of various management practices, you're not learning. You're just copying what others are doing. So to me, it's a passion. Absolutely.
Yeah, it has to be, for sure. I mean, and plus too, like I sit there and think about it, like with my daughters. It's like my youngest daughter. I mean, she's 10, gonna be 11. I mean, we have bird feeders all over our house. All different types of things, and she's my little science nerd, for sure. My oldest daughter likes it, but you have kids, you know how it is. You always have, that one that you think's gonna be the one. My oldest daughter, when she was younger, I taught her how to, keep ID trees and
Yeah.
go out there and make a catalog. So she went in there and she got just a regular notebook, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden we put the maple, we put the oak, we would write in there red oak, red oak, and I've got
That's
photos
right.
of her writing that stuff down, and she used to like doing that, and she still does,
Yeah.
but she's 14 years old, so she's teenager now, and going out and checking trail cams with dad. I've got plenty of photos of when she was younger, but my youngest daughter, is real into science and things like that. So, where I'm going with it is it should also be something to, you talk about generations, is get your generations involved. Like my kids, my daughter loves doing the bird feeders. We have a lot of catalpa trees, around, my property. So we've got a lot of honeybees. We've got honeybees,
Sure.
have hives inside some splits in some of the older trees and things like that. And she gets excited when she gets to see them, but all this stuff is nature, right? You should enjoy it and going out there and enjoying that with the generations. But you also said something too, is, you lead to the social media thing. And this is something that Matt and I talked about. The reason why the food plots are so big, I think, is because you talk about the herd mentality. It's like, look at behind you. It's like, how are you going to get a good picture of that to put that on and share with your friends? Like, look at this. They're going to be like, hey man, like, what am I looking at? Like, just a bunch of weeds or something like that. You're going to hear.
Yeah.
But if you were sitting there holding up a big old purple top, pulling that purple top out of the ground, holding that there, everyone would lose their mind. What company did you plant that with? Where'd you buy the seed? What fertilizer did you use? I'm right. So it's like, and I think a lot of this has to do with the whole sexiness, if you will, of what it is. But, what you're doing out there, you're managing nature's food plot is really what you're doing. So it should be the same thing, and you should enjoy it and not get, like you said, the herd mentality and follow into that, because just because everybody's doing it doesn't mean it's the best way to do something,
Yeah. One of the things I value most about my clients is they're inquisitive, and I'm extremely inquisitive, and we're always asking what if, I wonder why, or how come, or what if we would have done that instead of this. And that's how we learn, right? We learn from working, playing off of one another. And sometimes I will be looking at something in a field that's so obvious, and it has nothing to do, I don't think, with my formal education. It's just the fact that as a field biologist, I like to be in the field, and I'm trying to show a client, and then you see the light go off. And then there's other times I could be in Chester County, South Carolina, and a client who is an orthodontist, so by trade pays attention to detail and is very particular type A personality, sees something that I don't see. And then, as I get down in there and I dig in there, I see something, I learn something else because of that. And to me, that's what learning is all about. And I think that's, at one time, that's how people learned, was by actually getting out here in nature. And as you know, I'm not on social media that much anymore, and it's because it's a time killer, right? If you
Yeah.
ever look at how much time you spend on your phone, and I do the same thing because of the nature of my job. I mean, this time will count against me right here having the phone on.
Yeah.
But I feel like, yeah, we need to get back to getting out in nature. This is where the game is played. It's not played on YouTube. Um, yeah, this is it. This is where life is.
Well, and it's the thing too. I remember this back from my days, like in veterinary medicine, but you can apply it to anything. I mean, the arrogance of some people to like not want to learn from somebody, or just because, hey, I'm the consultant, you're going to listen to me, like let me talk, type of thing. Man, and I see that especially even now, like in my industry, that I spend more time in now, and it's like, hey, man, I'm only on these projects, once a week, so when things happen, like you're here every day, right? When you have a landowner that is, interested in managing his property, he's been trying to do it on his own for 5 years before he reaches out to someone like us. And he's made all these observations. Like, he knows his property. He knows where the deer are coming out. He knows when the deer are coming out. He can see
Sure.
what they're feeding on, right? He's in tune with what's going on. And it's, it takes, because there's not many, there's a low percentage of us out there. I think there's a higher percentage of people who are like, hey, man, I got the doctorate degree. I got the master's degree, whatever. Like, this is my world. Let me tell you what to do. And to have those people, we learn just as much from our clients and just individuals that we're involved with. That helps with, like you said, with us. I think there's a huge aspect of that, because not only in my world as a biologist, but also as a martial artist, right? I mean, I learn, from different types of people that walk into my gym. You can't do it exactly how I'm going to do it, because you're 5'2", you got short arms, short legs. Like, okay, we got to change it. And then you find little details that makes my, strategy, my game better. I mean, you can apply it to anything. So I encourage people that, if you are dealing or thinking about dealing with a consultant, is, make sure you always talk about finding the right consultant, and make sure that person's willing to listen to your input and your observations, because a lot of times, how often are we there? You talked about your South Carolina job. If you put that percentage wise on that property that you visited throughout a year, it's probably a pretty low percentage, right? And that guy, I don't know if he lives on that property, but he's there a lot more than you are, right? So it's vital.
And even when we're there, we're drinking bourbon and firing up the Traeger, so
well,
it's not always field time.
Yeah, that's even better. But anyway, that's where I'm going with it. So let's kind of, okay. So we've got a landowner, here in a little patch of, you're in Pennsylvania, I'm in Ohio, so we're on the border here, right? So let's sit there. We got a guy that's like, all right, I'm gonna start this. So he goes out into his field and he looks at this and he's like, man. He starts to learn. He's starting to learn, Jason. He's got Craig's book, or he's got the new apps that are out there, and he says, hey, I've got a bunch of non-native cool season perennial grasses out here that I need to – I want to turn this into something. I want to start building, this area. So I can't use herbicides. I'm going to try not to use – I'm going to do everything I can not to use herbicides. Really can't burn this area because I got houses kind of all around here. So – first step, what do you kind of tell people? Is it and I know where I'm going with this is, because I get this question, and I've even asked you this question. Is it heartburn? I think people are just horrified to take that disc and just fluff it up, just going through there and causing some kind of mechanical disturbance. They think they're cheating.
I think obviously what their goals are. You mentioned non-native grasses, whether it's cool seasons, warm seasons, whatever. I don't get fired up anymore over whether something's native or it's not. And I used to absolutely hate the European starling. And a friend who was a photographer just took the most amazing picture of a European starling, and he said, "Look at the iridescence on this thing," So now I've never really gotten too excited about this whole native, non-native. I'm more interested in what are your goals, right? If you're, it just depends. You have so much more learning to do before you grab the disc or you grab the herbicide. And I know my friends in the agricultural production world call them tools in the toolbox. And I've said sort of privately to some of these guys and gals that that's one of my most hated comments, right? Tools in the toolbox. It's like,
Yeah,
it's so overused
it
that,
is.
I think sometimes our toolbox should be dumped out, and we should probably either find, grandpa or great grandpa, if they're still alive, and go reassemble all new tools. And most of those start up here in the 5 inches between our ears. So, we need to lose this control mindset where we're going to control the system so it doesn't have these invasives, right? Honestly, some of the best species we use are not necessarily in that latent seed bank, but at the same time, as we use those species in a complementary fashion for 3 years, 5 years, maybe 6 years, we can start to pull out more of those native species out of that latent seed bank
Yeah,
and get them to express themselves. That's not something we set the goal of doing. That's not something that some academic taught me at the university. That's something that we have come to realize over the years, in that if we plant multi-species, hit all the plant functional groups, we rotate, we integrate animals, and we think like nature, and then we communicate. I had a state biologist in Missouri at a client's property say to me, you mentioned he's been there doing the burning for me, right? I can't be there, conducting the prescribed fire. So he does it, and he does it well. And we were walking the property, and he said, Jason, I had to get one of our retired field biologists out here with some botanists and some other experts to try to help me identify what some of these species are that are coming in with your quote unquote planted invasive non-native species, right? So to me, that's a success. We used our tools in our toolbox, meaning our blends, to pull out some of the native species that they hadn't seen in a generation
yeah,
or longer. So it really depends, I guess, on what your goal is for that field.
yeah,
I'm not going to say, that you're no longer regenerative or you don't care about soil health because you're spraying a herbicide. And we do know that some herbicides absolutely annihilate and eviscerate insects. There's enough research to prove that that's the case.
yeah,
If it's up to me, I also know that physical disturbance, so whether you're disking or you're plowing or whatever you're doing, you are ripping up this system that I'm sitting on right here, right now. If you look hard enough, you'll see ragweed, you'll see thistle, you'll see other things that a lot of people will panic over. And truthfully, if some of this thistle, which is displaced, I mean, it's scattered around this field, when it goes to seed head, there will be so many finches in this
yep,
field just
yeah,
annihilating that thistle seed. My wife goes to the store to buy a bag of thistle seed for $30, right? So I'm not overly concerned that it's here. I like the diversity. I personally think that this control word, I listened to a podcast yesterday, generally a fan of the host, and he had a manager, a wildlife biologist, I believe, a disease expert on, and they kept using this word control, and you hear it in predator control, weed control. We've got to stop that. Clients of mine that have not gotten that word out of their vocabulary really struggle with this system, with these the farming in nature's image, biomimicry. They struggle with it because they imagine it being no synthetic fertilizer, no herbicides, but still monoculture, pretty looking, clean food plots, right? And that's not how the system operates.
yeah. I mean, definitely, yeah. The goals are a huge thing. I think kind of using own examples because the properties where I see around where people really come to me with a bunch of questions is when I say the non-native cool seasons like fescue and things like that. There's just a carpet, there's
Sure.
nothing else
Right.
growing there. So, and I tell
And that's your
people,
fault. So I
yeah,
take a mirror with me. One of my favorite tools is a mirror, a shaving
that's
mirror.
awesome.
And in that fescue plot, I would throw my mirror and I would say, right there's your problem. Well,
Yeah,
what do you mean? We'll go look at that. And
yeah,
they look down in it, and it takes them a few seconds, and they realize it.
yeah,
The problem is you, right? The management. It's the management, and it's the old. It's
yeah,
not the cow. It's the how, or whatever
yeah.
whatever they
I
say in
love
that
that.
world.
I need to
If
do that,
if
man.
you don't put, nature is so good at playing nature's game. It's like a home game versus an away game. That if you don't put something in the soil, guess what nature is going to do? She's
Yeah,
going to put something in the soil. And
Yeah.
she doesn't care if it's native, non-native, invasive, nature does not care. The goal is to cover up that scab, put something there, and if it's fescue, that's your fault,
Yeah.
not nobody
I
else's fault.
I don't get caught up on the invasive versus I used to. I used to really get like picky about it, but I mean, I remember this was years and years ago where I had a project that I was doing for bobwhite quail. I was doing an edge feathering project on some CRP property and things like that and it was one of the stakeholders was the Division of Wildlife and of course, they wanted removal of invasive species. So multiflora rose, garlic mustard, autumn olive, bush honeysuckle, those kind of things. And
Yeah,
those were
most of those are great species,
yeah,
by the way.
yeah. So, but in for Bob White, as I'm sitting there looking, I said, I understand you want to do this, but so for anybody who doesn't know what edge feathering is, edge feathering is you go along, a timber stand of surrounding an agricultural field, and you identify patches. So maybe it's 100 foot by 50 foot deep. What you do is you go in there and you fell all the trees. You let the trees kind of fall into the field, and what that does is it provides running cover, feeding cover, things like that for these small game birds kind of go in and out, and amongst other things. But that's pretty much the idea with it. You know, but I'm sitting there thinking, I'm looking at this area, and there's no bob whites, there's no ringnecks, in those areas at all. And I'm looking around, and this is in the, just as the spring's, coming up, so it was a little bit kind of late to do it. But I'm sitting there, and they're like, "Look at all this green." I said, "Yeah," I said, "But you guys, I like the mirror idea because I said you guys are doing this. I said that's all garlic mustard. I said you're
Hey,
seeing,
no YouTube in that now. You're
yeah,
gonna go YouTube this whole mirror thing, and
I know, right? But
it's gonna
I'm
be
like,
Eric's
I'm
idea, just
like,
like everybody else.
I'm like, no. So, but I'm like, that's garlic mustard. I'm like, there's no structural integrity there. I said, come the real stressful times of the year for this species, that's not going to be there. And you're having me pull and rip out and spray this multiflora rose in these patches. I'm like, this is the only cover that these species have while they're here. I said, there's no other habitat. So yes, it's invasive, but the goal is to bring back local populations of this bird species. We can't be taking out the one thing of cover that they have to avoid predation. Like it's just, and I mean, there was some other, and they said there all the other species, the other benefits that they have. It's like, I mean, I get it. They're quote unquote invasive, and you don't want them here. But if they're not here, there's very little here at all
Sure.
that's going to have anything. So it's like you said, the goal and having that conversation sometimes. And I could do a case study on this project because of all the different stakeholders and all the conflicting ideas. And I'm sure you've been there before too, but
Yeah, that's usually when I get out.
yeah, well, I was young in my career at the time, and it was one of those so where I was just excited to be able to get to do, a wildlife job and to be able to. Yeah, I was young and
Sure.
naive.
And you learn. Yeah, you
You
learn.
learned, and I learned a lot on that project. But as landowners, it's the same thing. Don't get bent out of shape that if you think you got to put a disc in the ground and fluff up the top part of the vegetation, don't think someone's going to come knocking on your door and chastise you and things like that because
Well, I think the ultimate question is the physical disturbance a problem? Yes. Why are you doing it in the beginning? You have to go through
yeah,
that dichotomous key or thought checklist of why are we doing this, and if it's the best tool at the time, then okay, I have no problem. I'm not completely anti-disking or
yeah,
sometimes maybe even plowing, but I think a lot of times when people say, "Well, I'm just going to do it one more time," well, you're not changing anything. So
yeah,
don't take a picture and post it up on YouTube. Or
yeah.
certainly, I'm not here today to slam social media, but it cracks me up how
I
a
hate
guy
it too. Don't worry.
he will do the same practice that he has always done, but claim that because he thinks because regenerative agriculture is sexy or soil health is sexy, that So I'm thinking to myself, all right, why don't you just get ahead of it and
Yeah,
instead of get behind the eight ball, why don't you do this, this, and that and get ahead of it? Or maybe you should start looking at species that can compete with
Yeah.
that particular species. And yeah, so
That
it's a process.
it is. And yeah, that's I'm just sitting here thinking. I mean, there's no a plan is just something is just a set of instructions that go wrong, type of thing. To where and you go to a property and like I'm gonna look at this, I'm gonna plan on doing this, and it's like, okay, we gotta rework this. It's not gonna be the same thing. So I guess where I'm going with it is if you're listening to this and you want to get into this, don't panic, and things like that, but have a plan. That's a good way to put it
Yeah,
because
and the plan. Since you're using that word plan, I have that conversation with clients all the time, usually over a bourbon and a steak. Is that a plan? My favorite quote on a plan is Mike Tyson's quote, right?
everyone has a
And
plan
whether
until they
Mike
get
made
punched.
that up or not.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I know
yeah,
that's overused, but that's how nature works, right? So I like to go to clients and say, you know what? Maybe they already had a written plan from another biologist, and it's 56 pages long and it has maps and all this fancy, pretty stuff. And I say, if that was good, why am I here? Because there are other places I can be, and there's probably other places you want to be. So as a consultant, I'm a teacher, right? I'm not a public school teacher. I'm a private teacher in nature, trying to change the way that we think about. And I'm still working on uh,
yeah.
my own thinking. That's why I was out here this morning when you said you're going to be 15 minutes late. For me, that was 15 minutes to just sit here and pay attention to what's going on in my field. So, I think a plan is great, but if you don't have an understanding of how the system works, I think you should focus on that educational background first and understand how the system works so that when you see something you or observe something and you truly see it and record it and understand what's going on, now you can adapt, because nature is constantly changing, and nature thrives. I mean, we talk about planned purposeful disruptions. I'm not a big fan anymore of keeping notebooks and stuff. I do it almost like the football coach who charts his own plays or has an assistant coach chart his plays so that he's not patternable, right? I don't want to, I get into these rotations in some of my fields, and I have in my mind what I'm going to do next year, and I'm about 3 to 5 years out. Unfortunately, I can become patternable to some of these insect species. I haven't sprayed an insecticide, a biocide, a herbicide, nothing side in 6 or 7 years here, right? So if I run into an insect problem, I'll probably just deal with it. But honestly, we have so many beneficial insects at this point
Yeah.
that we don't hit that painful threshold, and I'm sure we could at any point, but the system is functioning again. We have a lot of coyotes. My neighbors are panicked because we have more. I don't like that word a lot. We have more. It seems we have more coyotes. That's because as I walked out here this morning, I must have flushed 15 rabbits, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I say, listen, the predator base does not thrive unless the prey base is thriving.
Yeah.
So if there's more predator, I'd rather them be wolves. I get it. But if there's more coyotes, I'm fine with that, right? Because they're eating more rabbits. And honestly, if they pick off a few fawns, I'm happy with that as well.
Yeah.
That's a really cool picture opportunity.
You just blew everybody's mind right now. Yeah, I tell the same people too. I actually had this conversation a couple weeks ago with my neighbors, because I was outside. As you know, I got bird dogs and stuff, and I was outside with my dogs doing some scent work and things like that. And my neighbor just happened to be doing yard work, and we were talking. He's like, "Hey, have you been hearing the coyotes?" And I said, "Yeah." I was like, listen, man, they're everywhere. Like, I don't even think about it. Like, I don't have heartburn over coyotes either. And it's the same thing is we have, I was talking to him and, I said, yeah, I said, it's because the prey is around here. I said, there's deer everywhere. I was like, if you look around, I said, the vegetation, there's all sorts of soft mass, species and things like that, brambles, things like that. I said, but the amount of rabbits that are back here. And he looked at me and he's like, you have rabbits? I mean, now mind you, he's like separated from my house by like an acre and a half. I'm like, yeah, man, there's rabbits everywhere back here, because I started managing, the back acre or two. It's kind of like an isolated, area or surrounding timber or within surrounded timber. And I use that area for a lot of scent work. So I've been back there, managing it over the past couple years, to kind of do the same thing, bring it back to a more native, nature's image type of thing. But I've been also mowing like little patches of it for my dogs to hit corners and do scents and stuff like that. But I'm like, we go back there and there are rabbits everywhere, and it just blows people's minds. So me and him took a walk back there. I said, yeah, man. I said, look at the difference of what, my behind my house looks like compared to what's behind your house. And you're talking a 2-acre difference. I said, that's why the coyotes are here, is because you're hearing them behind our house because they're over here on these, and it's kind of my fault for cutting in the trails and stuff like that. I'm kind of creating little predator islands, if you will, but it's not hurting the rabbit population. It's not like I've got them everywhere. You know what I'm saying? Like some people, like you're creating. Some academic would be like, hey, it's a predator island. It's like, okay, let's pump the brakes here a little bit. But you know what I'm saying? But yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because the coyote thing is a whole nother episode. I'm going to plan on getting a guy on because I really want to dive in and talk about this because I hear so many people talk about predator control and going out there and shooting coyotes. And I'm like, hey, man, like it's your property. You can do what you want, but you better be very careful. You better have a real good strategy involved or you're going to make
the system.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and I agree, shooting coyotes is probably fun, and that's fine if they want to do that. I did a series on that on my podcast, and one of my clients, good friend, who also has property in Pennsylvania and Iowa, he was messing with me, but he called me a tree hugger, and it was a joke, obviously, but he didn't like the podcast, and it didn't hurt my feelings, but the whole idea of that topic is that it should be predator management, and that there are times where predator management may very well be needed, but I'm a big fan of almost everything in this system right here that I'm sitting in that is not functioning in a biomimicry state is probably not functioning properly because of something that we have done or something that we have not done. And I'm not one of these big anti-human being people, but we are pretty damn stupid when it comes to managing and understanding how the system works. And I include myself because it's hard to get out of that human train of thought and think like nature. So, there's a time if we're trying to reintroduce a species that maybe we extirpated, like maybe wild turkey or you mentioned the bobwhite quail, maybe we need to artificially go in there and manage the predator population to give that species a chance to rebuild. But understand the only reason we're doing that is because we went in there with clean farming practices or chemicals or whatever and created that dysfunction in the first place.
Yeah, and that was kind of the thing with the Bob White, project that I was on, is I was like, here we are, it's CRP property. Like you look around and everything's tilled, and then there's like a complete like 90-degree between the timber and then the row crop field. It's like there's nothing here. Of course there's
simple.
There's no Bob Whites. I said you've probably got 12 feral cats on your property for barn cats they're breeding, multiple times, multiple cats a year, and you got coyotes and you got nest raiding species. I'm like, why would you think that they're here? So like you said, there's those reasons to do it for sure. But when I was younger too, you're like, oh man, it's a fun thing to go out there and whack some coyotes, type of thing. But you start, as like you said, and I'm the same way. You start, learning from people as you grow in your career. You learn from people that spend time in the field. They make observations, they do management, and they come up with these things on why they're doing it, and to take that in, like you have, I'm sure you're a completely different, biologist than what you were when you graduated MSU or Penn State. Like it just happens organically with, life experience. You just become a different person. And if you surround
Yeah.
yourself and have that open mind, you don't have to be a biologist to have a successful property. You mentioned earlier, having an understanding, being a teacher. And I tell clients too, I always ask people, I'm like, well, how much research have you kind of done on this, whatever it is. So, let's say it's something, kind of going sidetrack here. My job, I do a lot of stormwater management type of thing on construction sites. So I said, okay, what do you know about, like, I talk to engineers, in my company that are designing these practices. I say, listen, man, like, I know the textbook is telling you to do this, but I'm telling you it's not going to work. And this is why, because for the past 12 plus years, I've been doing this. It's like, this is going to have a failure. Like, we need to do this, and it's not because some academic told me. It's because I've had boots on the ground watching this practice fail over and over and over. It's like, hey, this is why this isn't going to work. And you have to have that understanding. And I think going into it from a landowner perspective is doing some research and understanding, okay, what is this I keep hearing about, biomimicry and nature's image and things like that, talk about, native species coming out of, just having an understanding of what something is, so that when they bring guys like you and me out, we can have, it's like, okay, well, do I have to teach you, this whole thing from the ground up as well? I mean, at least have some kind of an understanding, because if you don't have an understanding, you don't have any goals. I mean, how do you know what your goals are if you don't have an understanding of what you're doing? So, that's one thing I caution.
The day that I realize that I've gotten through to a client, and I have pictures of this in my cell phone, is the day that I'm on a property, and maybe I turned around to pick up a clipboard or whatever, get a drink, and that client grabs my spade and he's walking out through the field digging ditches with my spade. That's the day I realized that I just took a business owner who hired me to just grow more bigger, more mature bucks. But now he's starting to understand the system and where it all starts. And that's why, honestly, I wanted to put, when I'm a guest on podcasts, I try to get out here like this, because I want people to realize that this is where we learn, right? This is the ultimate take home. We could go 8,000 different directions about soil health, regenerative agriculture, eliminating or minimizing synthetic inputs, the chemistry experiment that most of our soil fertilizer salesmen, soil testing labs want us to do right now, academicians, all that. The bottom line is, forget about all that garbage. Grab yourself a bucket and a shovel and go dig a hole. You talk about, in your job, you have to look at essentially a portion of the hydrologic cycle. So the water, I feel like that's something that's kind of been an interest of mine since I started dabbling with soils. And the ST1, which is the soil health tool that Haney and I developed and now market. When you see how this system absorbs water like a sponge, you quickly realize how you can step back from those clients in South Carolina, for instance. That ground was farmed. The entire A horizon is gone, right? So we are now trying to rebuild that basically that topsoil section. Now, if you know anything about soil aggregates and water retention, infiltration, that that's non-existent there. So I try not to tell them this, but that's going to make their job at restoring soil health or regenerating the life in those fields exponentially more difficult, right? Because they'll plant and they may get an inch or an inch and a quarter of rain over the next couple of months, but they're not absorbing any of that rain. That's all going into their pine stands, and it's doing great things for the pines, but we can't retain any of that.
Yeah, it's just sheet flowing off.
Yeah.
I mean, I see it all the time too, because like I said, I mean, I do I'm out in the woods and stuff a lot, but I also, like I said, my time's kind of divided half and half. And when I'm on these construction sites, I see the same thing. It's just compaction, compaction, compaction.
Yeah.
And that's because of construction vehicle travel. But in that world, I'm like, hey, you want to control the name of the game for their permitting, is controlling the water runoff. I'm like, hey, you got to change up, and alter, the things that you're doing, because you're just compacting. It's like concrete. The water's just
Mm-hmm.
right off. It's gone,
Yep.
and it's going places that we don't want it to go, type of thing. So it's the same thing. You see it, like you said, in your field. If there's no infiltration, that's going to be you can do a lot. You can have the greatest plan. I don't want to say that word. I know you like it. You have the greatest strategy in the world, but if you're not being able to incorporate the water, then that's a big problem. Okay, so let's change up here a little bit. So let's talk a little bit, man, on the ST1. Because I listened to that podcast you had with Rick, and you guys were talking about it on your podcast. And I wanted to ask you how things were going with that, because I haven't talked to you in a little while. But you mentioned that it's out now, so
Yeah.
let's talk about it a little bit, man.
I certainly didn't want to use this as a shameless plug for it.
No, hey, listen, I have no problem. You can plug whatever you want, man.
Honestly, it may not even be a great fit for, and it probably is not a tool that most wildlifers need. Having said that, many do buy it. But I think the underlying story is probably where the value is for most wildlifers like us. So when I've always been a fan of going to conferences, and I've always been, as much as I talk down on on
Yeah,
peer-reviewed science now, I value somebody based on how much time they spend out here learning and teaching from nature. Um, I always wanted to go to multiple discipline uh, type conferences and meet the people, meet the cast of characters and the experts. And, Southeast Tier Study Group, hell, I've been going to that conference, or had been, since I was an undergrad student. I drove with Bronson Strickland, back in 90, I don't know, 7 or 8, William McKinley and all those guys. And I enjoy that, right? But after years and years, it just became, I don't want to say redundant, because it's a great conference, but you find value when you're out here and working with clients, when you understand other disciplines, other niches. So the soils, like I said, the water cycle, the carbon nitrogen cycle, and how all these things work, because they're all interrelated. I went to a soil health conference. I can't remember the year now, maybe 16. It doesn't matter. And there was really one guy I wanted to truly meet, and there were some others, the Gabe Brown type guys, and David Kleinschmidt, and these guys in the ag world. And I met those guys and a bunch of other fine folks. But I met Rick Haney, and the two of us just instantly hit it off, which was kind of odd, because he's a PhD soil nerd, dirt nerd. Well, I say kind of odd, heavy bourbon drinker and tequila. So we hit that off. And here I am, a deer guy, right? So I thought, this guy's not going to want to talk to me. He's got so many irons in the fire. And we immediately hit it off, and we ended up going out that night, sitting down at the bar. And I specifically said to him, Rick, can you explain something to me? It's 2016 or whatever it is. We are still, and I was doing, sending soil samples, mine and client samples, to him in Texas. We were doing a small research project for the wildlife world, conducting the Haney, the Haney health test.
Yeah.
And I sort of understood the test, but I said, can you explain something to me? As much as I like this test, it's 2016, and we are still going out into a field in Missouri or Kansas or Iowa or Pennsylvania, whatever, Ohio, digging up a little bit of soil, putting it in a bag, and I'm shipping it to Texas or wherever you ship it to. That seems odd to me, because, in the literature, they call it in situ, which means in the field.
Yeah.
What's going on in the field right now as a part of the system is not a mirror image of what goes on when you take, I'm sitting here playing with cereal rye head, or you take a soil out and send it off. You've just pulled out one part of that whole, and it's neither the whole nor the part are operating like they operated together.
Yeah.
And he kind of had this half smile, and he said, do you want to do a project? And I said, well, yeah, of course. What kind of project? And I said, he said, I've always wanted to do an infield soil health test. And I said, well, that's where the game's played for me. That's where I live. I travel to get to the field. I'd love nothing more to do than to be able to assess both baseline soil health in field and then also monitor it as our management progresses. So we started that, and probably the best thing that happened to us was the COVID-19 nonsense that occurred. And I found myself on an island in Florida. Rick was in Texas. And I was still traveling. I had some of our, what we call the GNT tube in fields all over the country. Rick was in Texas. He was traveling to Kansas. He was traveling to Oklahoma. And we were, doing a lot of research during that time period. Somebody's driving out my driveway here waving. My
Hopefully
dogs, you talk about tracking, by the way. My dogs tracked me out to this field, and they're not sure what this setup is out here, but so we got to work in and we got to studying and just asking questions, and we put it in the hands of some really intelligent ag consultants at the time. And just one thing led to another. In the soil health world, the only true biological indicator or indicator of life is CO2, right? Carbon dioxide. So we breathe in oxygen, we breathe out carbon dioxide. If you can't see us or you don't know we're here, and you had a very small, robust sensor that could absorb and identify carbon dioxide in parts per million, say, you could say, hey, there's life here. If you lock us up in a room, or a bunch, 23 kids in a schoolroom, and you stick one of our sensors in that room, you can get a pretty good idea with how many students or people, human beings there are in that room. And that was kind of the general idea. There was some other sensor work done. We had done the literature review. Me more than Rick. Rick was towards the end of his career, and he had faced an entire career of literally fighting with the, I guess you call them conventional chemistry experiment soil type people, right? People who think that they look at it as a chemistry experiment. So he was just fed up. He didn't need any more proof. He knew, he was convinced, but he saw that I needed, to convince myself that some of these, soil arrays that these big academicians build in fields, they spent $50, $60, $80,000 building these, these in-field, in-situ sensors. Rick and I wanted to build a very simple, affordable system that anybody could use. And that's what we did. And now we're selling them to a lot of universities are buying them for research. I'm proud to say that my alma mater, Mississippi State, has purchased one, and they're also looking at, I know they brought on a PhD student to look at, regenerative wildlife and that kind of thing. So super excited about that. And then a lot of food companies. So the folks who put your cereal in a box, the carbon markets, producers, grazers, production, vegetable folks are buying it to monitor their management essentially. And that, I tell people, ask me, how often do you soil sample here, right? I still do it every now and then, but having my sensor has been a cheat. It's been a huge cheat because I can go do something, whether it's crimp terminate or plant, species A or multi-species A, whatever, and then I can monitor the effects on the life in the soil. And that's what this is all about, right? Everything that we do now from a management perspective is about asking, how does this affect life in the soil? So yeah, that's kind of the nutshell of it all.
Where can, I'm on your website right now. Is it on your, can people buy it through your website?
No, I do not have it on there now.
Okay.
Essentially everything's been word of mouth. I know that's kind of crazy. Rick and I, our main goal was to put this in the hands of farmers and growers.
Gotcha. And
keep it out of the hands of the tech world, right? Oh, so everybody wants to turn it into an app, and they want to give, Apple some money and all these other people. Yeah. We want to put it in the hands of the small time growers and grazers and the universities. And we plan, obviously we've had some investors express interest in buying it, scaling it. just not interested in that. We want to try to help
Yeah.
people realize
A,
that
a lot
this
of
is
times,
it.
that's a one-way road to screwing something up.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Yeah, hey man, I'll plug the shit out of it, type of thing.
No,
I am
if
I am
anybody is
content. I
interested,
don't. Yeah,
you can email me, Jason at
yeah.
droptinewildlife.com or Jason at droptineseed.com. But
Eh,
honestly, a lot of times I try to spend some time selling people out of it. For the kit, it's $3,500. If you apply synthetic nitrogen, you can make that up quickly
Yeah,
by cutting your inputs, right, based on what we do. I like it when I see large food companies that you would read on the back of a cereal box buying it, because some of them are starting to hold their growers to the fire, saying, hey, if you don't, if you can't use this tool and record, say, 6,000 parts per million CO2 in this field, we don't want your grain, or your oats or whatever they're
yeah,
buying from them. So that to me makes I know Rick too, it makes us proud
yeah. That's
that
cool.
we're having that kind of impact on health.
And another thing that I like too, and I'm sure, and this is why, like, listen, I'll push everyone's product. I'll push your consulting company. Hey, man, I'm a consultant too, and people are like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm not worried. We're not competition, man. Like, we're in different part." I'm like, and
There's so much.
it's just like, hey, man, if that shit's stupid, I can't stand that, So
Yeah,
when I get
there's a
guys,
lot of work out there, a lot of work, and there's a lot of people who
yeah,
want, some of the best projects I have are projects that have where the person funding it, whether it's a corporation or an individual or whatever, identifies the fact that one biologist like you or consultant has something to offer that's completely different than what I have to offer, right? When
yeah,
you have these multiple disciplines, and sometimes there's arguments, sometimes I feel like I'm being set up in camps and in boardrooms all over the country when I'm brought in with the synthetic fertilizer salesman. It's a setup, and I'm game for that. That's If you can't hold your ground in that
yeah.
situation and make your point, then you're not worth your salt anyway.
Yeah, and I get a lot too. Like it's always funny. Like when I talk to private landowners and stuff too, I always find something that has to do with like Army Corps, EPA. Like, okay, well, we're gonna do this, but you need to take into consider this, and they're like, what? I'm like, well, yeah, like there's certain practices that are exempt from like NPDES permitting and things like that, and I'm like, okay, well, if you want to do this, like that's a wetland. Like we can't nuke that thing. Like you just can't do that. It's like, hey, I can help you. Like if you want to do this, or people that want to, fill in a pond or fill in name it. I'm like, well, you got to make sure this is an isolated water body. It doesn't have any hydrological connection because it could be considered. It's like there's all sorts of other things that, like you said, this multidiscipline. And to me, I talked with Matt about this too. As I said, in my opinion, you want to look for someone, like you say it a lot, and I try to say it a lot too. Is that I'm an ecologist. I'm not a biologist. I'm an ecologist, and that is that's a crucial thing, because if you look at what ecology is, for those of you that are listening, what the hell's the difference? Ecology is studying the interactions that an organism has with its environment. So if you look at the white-tailed deer, I mean, you're a deer guy, I'm a deer guy, Matt's a deer guy, everybody, that in that aspect, we're deer guys. I said, if you look at it as an ecologist, I have to understand at a population level the population dynamics of the white-tailed deer. I have to understand home ranges. I have to understand, ecological cover types. I have to understand what roles those play. But then I also have to take the individual and I have to understand nutrition. I have to understand, biochemistry. I have to understand, reproduction. I have to understand genetics. I mean, if you look at everything now, ecologists, we're skilled. We're not a master of anything, but guys like you can sit here and talk about soil health. We can talk about the nitrogen and organic, all the different horizons of soil. We can talk about, the plant life behind you. We can talk about, just the list goes on and on and on. Now, are we a Dr. Rick Haney when it comes to soil health? I sure as hell am not. But I can understand, when they're giving a lecture, and I know you more so than most can understand these things, and we can listen to a botanist talk about how to key out a plant and identify a plant and go, yeah, okay, I never thought of that. That's pretty cool, and
Sure.
this is how I do it. But you get a lot, and I know them, you get a lot of people in industry that they would be lost. Even people that think they're an ecologist, and it's like, okay, well, you start having a conversation with them, and it's just completely over their head. And so, I mean, there's those people out there too. That's something to yeah.
I think, yeah, you talked earlier about how does a guy get started? You've got to have a passion. I don't know if I have friends now. Everybody knows I'm not really on social media, so they'll when they see something that reminds them of me, they send it to me in a screenshot or whatever. But I can't tell you how many times I've gotten that picture of the guy sitting on the swing, and it says something about when you want to talk soil health at a party, and he's sitting all alone on a swing, right?
Oh,
That must be me because I get that a million times.
yeah.
But I think what people have to understand is you have to start by getting out in the field and understand. That's where it all started for me, is something just didn't look right. And you have to open up your mind and change the way you think about things in order to change the way you do things.
And that's a wrap on another episode of the Hunt Science Podcast. I want to thoroughly take this time to thank everybody who has listened or even watched till the end of this episode and had the opportunity to hopefully enjoy the show that we put out for you. It's something that we're really trying to do and take notes and put good quality content for everybody to enjoy. We want to take this moment also to, if you enjoyed the show, check us out over on our social media platforms. Give us a like, give us a follow, check that bell notification, look for the content that we're putting out. Of course, reach out to us, leave comments. Did you like the show? We would love to hear your reviews of the show and any concerns that you have, any updates or any type of feedback to make our content better. We're always open ears for the people that are consuming our show and our content. We want to hear from you. What is it that you want to see, and what is it that you would like us to do? If you want to check us out on any of our social media, first off, you can head over to our website, go to www.huntsciencepodcast.com. You can check us out on Instagram at huntscience_podcast, or you can check us out over at our Facebook page at The Hunt Science Podcast. Any of those is open. You can, like I said, feel free to comment and all of the above that you do with social media. I just want to take this time again to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for everybody for watching and listening to the content that we're putting out. It means the world to me, and I can't wait for you guys to join us on another episode. Until then, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.